Stranded together, the sky above the frozen world was filled with fire ray. Training ship had exploded in orbit, and its drop pods scattered across the ice planet. One of those pods slammed into a snowy mountain ridge and tumbled down like a broken toy inside. It was a young human soldier named Jakey, groaned as the hatch cracked open and freezing air rushed inside. His arm was bleeding and one leg was pinned under a metal panel. He pushed it off with effort and crawled outside. Snow blew hard in his face, and the wind cut through his suit. He looked around but saw nothing but white. No signal, no team, just silence. Activated his comms, but only static replied. His mission was simple: join the joint training exercise with the alien forces of the Alliance. But now he was alone. He grabbed his pack and started walking toward a hill, hoping to find shelter. Temperature dropped fast, and his fingers started to go numb. He knew he would not survive the night outside. Then he saw a second pod partly buried in snow. He ran to it and banged on the hatch. No answer. He forced it open and found someone inside. It was an alien girl from the same training unit. Her name tag read Lena. Her skin was light blue, and her hair shimmered like silver. She was wrapped in a heat blanket, breathing shallow. Jake hesitated. Her species and his had fought wars in the past, and old hatred still burned in many hearts, but she was hurt and unconscious. He stepped inside, closed the hatch, and sealed it against the wind. He checked her vitals. She was alive but weak. The pod's power core was dead, so the heat was fading fast. Jake looked at the small emergency pack in the corner. One sleeping bag, thermal lined, made for one person. The only way to survive the night was to share. I've stared at the bag, then at her. She opened her eyes slowly and looked at him. Her voice was soft and tired. You re-human? Jake nodded and replied, yeah, but right now that doesn't matter. She coughed and said, the heat won't last. We'll both freeze if we stay apart. Jake hesitated again, then unzipped the sleeping bag and helped her inside. He slid in after her and zipped it up tight. It was cramped. Their bodies pressed together, and the air was warm but tense. She was shivering. He could feel it. Offered her the heat pack from his suit, and she took it with a faint smile. Thanks, she whispered. The storm outside grew louder, but inside the bag there was a strange calm. They lay still for a long time, listening to the wind and to each other's breathing. Jake finally broke the silence. Did your pod crash too? She nodded. We were hit in orbit. The whole exercise went wrong. Jake frowned. I thought this was supposed to be a simple test. She gave a weak laugh. Training always turns into chaos when humans and aliens mix. He looked at her face. It was bruised and tired, but strong. Why did you offer to share this with Mesh? Look into his eyes. Because I don't want to die, and I don't want you to die either. We're not enemies, not here, not now. Jake felt a strange feeling in his chest. He had trained for combat, for survival, but not for this, not for trust. You're different from what I expected, he said. She replied, so are you. Their bodies pressed closer for warmth. Outside the blizzard screamed, but inside they were still. Jake closed his eyes. For the first time in hours he felt safe. Not because of the sleeping bag, not because of the heat, but because someone, an alien, someone had chosen kindness. He did not know what would happen tomorrow. He did not know if rescue was coming. But tonight they would survive together, and that one choice to share warmth would change everything. Far above them in the cold sky, satellites spun, and watch signals were picked up. Life signs were marked, and in a command ship orbiting the planet, someone noticed two signals, human and alien, together in one location, unmoving. The galaxy was watching it. Just did not know yet that history was being written inside a sleeping bag. One sleeping bag. Two heartbeats inside the sleeping bag. The cold was still there, but it no longer felt deadly. Jake lay on one side while Lena rested beside him, her back lightly pressed against his chest. There was no space to move, no room for walls between them. Their breaths made little clouds in the air, each one mixing with the other. The silence was thick but not heavy. Jake spoke first, his voice low. So, what happens if no one finds us? Lena shifted a little, then said, we wait, and we hope. Not the best plan, but better. Then panicked. Jake gave a soft laugh, his breath warm on the back of her neck. You always this calm, she replied. I have to be. My People believe showing fear makes you weak, but right now I do feel fear. Jake nodded. I'm scared too. This wasn't part of the mission. Lena turned slightly to face him. Her eyes were large, glowing faintly in the dark. You know what's strange, she said. I trained to fight humans my entire life. But here with you, I feel less alone than I ever did among my own kind. Jake blinked. Same for me, he whispered. They lay quiet for a moment longer. Then she asked him, what made you join the Alliance program? Jake thought for a moment. My brother served before me. He believed in peace and unity. I wanted to see what he saw in all this, Lena asked. And did you see? I've looked at her face so close now in this moment. I think I do. She looked away, her voice soft. My people think humans are too emotional, too reckless, but they never mention your loyalty, your heart. Jake smiled a little and said, and your people think your kind are cold and distant, but you invited me into your only warmth. Maybe we're both wrong about each other. Storm outside hit harder, shaking the pod. Snow covered it deeper with each passing hour. Jake pulled the sleeping bag tighter around them. Lena curled in a bit closer, her hands near his chest. Is it all right if I stay like this? She asked. Nodded. Sure, anything that keeps us alive. They began to talk more as time passed, stories of their training, of childhood memories, of quiet moments from two different worlds. Jake talked about Earth, its blue skies, green trees, street food, warm rain. Lena spoke of her home, glowing seas, tall mountains, silver grass that hummed in the wind. Their worlds were so different, but somehow their feelings were the same: loneliness, pressure, the hunger for meaning. As they shared these small pieces of their lives, something began to grow between them. Not romance, not yet, but something that could become more trust. Somewhere high above the planet, a drone passed over their location. Its thermal scanners picked up the pod and marked it for review. Inside, the Alliance Command Center officers watched the feed. Sir, we have a signal from two life forms, both confirmed, one human, one alien. They seem to be in the same shelter. The commander narrowed his eyes together. Yes, sir, both signals are in the same heat source. They are not moving. They may be conserving energy. He leaned forward. Keep observing. Do not alert either side's leadership yet. This could complicate things. Back in the pod, Jake felt sleep pulling at him, but Lena's voice kept him awake. Do you think they'll come for you? Answered, if they know we're alive, they will. She looked at him. But what if they see us together and decide we're not worth saving? He hesitated, then said, then we save ourselves. She smiled a little and said bold words for someone stuck in a sleeping bag with an alien girl. He laughed softly. Bold words are all I've got. They rested again, side by side, heartbeat to heartbeat, breath to breath. Lena spoke once more, this time quieter. Thank you for trusting me, Jake replied. Thank you for not leaving me outside. Drifted to sleep, wrapped in warmth that had nothing to do with technology outside the pod. The storm began to slow. Dawn would come soon, but with it would come questions, eyes, voices from above, and none of them were ready for what this night had already changed. The silent hours before light touched the snow, their story had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy watches. The morning light came slowly over the icy world. Thin beams of sunlight broke through the clouds and touched the snow with pale warmth inside the broken pod. Jake opened his eyes first. Lena was still asleep, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, her breathing calm. For a few seconds he did not move. He felt peace, real peace, not the kind promised in meetings or treaties, but something quiet and true. Then reality returned. They were still stranded, still surrounded by ice, still far from safety. He gently shifted, and Lena opened her eyes. Morning already, she whispered, her voice low. Jake nodded barely. We're still here, still breathing. She sat up inside the cramped sleeping bag, stretching her arms as far as the space allowed. Then she looked at the pod wall and frowned. Did you hear that? Jake paused, then heard it too, a faint sound like a low hum coming from above the pod. He unzipped the bag slowly, pulled his gear closer, and crawled toward the hatch. He wiped frost from the small window and looked outside. Something moved in the sky, a drone. Not one of theirs, not from the training exercise. Something smaller, sleeker, black with no markings. Lena moved beside him, her eyes sharp. That's not Alliance standard, Jake. Agreed, it's watching us. For a long minute they said nothing. Then the drone flew away, disappearing over the White Hills. Jake looked at Lena. Someone just saw us together, and not by accident. She nodded and said, then they'll talk above the planet in a command center floating in low orbit. A group of officials sat in silence. A large screen showed the frozen terrain and 2 life signals in close proximity. Multiple camera angles now revealed clearer images inside the pod. 2 figures, human and alien. In one space, one sleeping bag sharing heat. One officer said nothing, just sipped his drink, his face unreadable. Another one leaned forward and said, "Is going to stir trouble." The general at the center of the table spoke slowly. If the media gets this, if the civilians see this, we'll have protests, or worse, an alien girl and a human soldier sleeping together during a military program. This could destroy everything, one diplomat replied, or it could build something new. Peace, real peace. The general slammed his hand down. Or chaos. You know how fragile this alliance is. One misunderstanding, one photo, one story, and war starts again. The room fell quiet. Meanwhile, back in the pod, Jake and Lena worked on restarting the emergency beacon. They knew someone had seen them. Now they wanted to be sure someone would actually come. Jake checked the small control panel. Sparks popped out, but the screen blinked on. He turned the signal to full power and linked it to the main distress frequency. If they don't come now, they're choosing not to come, he said. Lena stared out the small window. Maybe that's the test. Not the cold, not the survival, but this us together. Jake nodded slowly. And what happens if they fail the test? Lena gave a sad smile. Then maybe the galaxy doesn't deserve peace. At that moment, a message flashed on the screen. Rescue unit inbound, estimated arrival 2 hours. Jake and Lena looked at each other. Relief filled their eyes, but behind it came fear. What would the rescuers think? What story would they tell? And what price would they pay for a single night of survival together? Hours later, a ship came through the clouds and landed near the crash site. Soldiers in white armor stepped out, their weapons holstered, their movements calm. Hatch of the pod opened, and cold air rushed in. Jake helped Lena stand. They both stepped out together, one human, one alien, side by side. The soldiers looked at them, but said nothing. One of them handed Jake a blanket and medical kit. Another helped Lena walk toward the transport. They were not separated, not yet. Inside the ship they sat together, strapped into the same bench. No words were spoken by the crew, only quiet glances, suspicion, curiosity. Back in orbit, the drone footage had already been leaked. Images spread across the Alliance network faster than fire screens. Everywhere showed a human and an alien girl sharing a sleeping bag in the middle of a deadly snowstorm. Some people called it betrayal, others called it beautiful. Some shouted about rules being broken, enemies no more. The transport ship flew silently through the upper sky. Inside the cold metal walls, Jake sat next to Lena, still wrapped in a blanket. Their bodies ached, but their eyes were sharp, watching every move around them. No one spoke to them, not even the medics. The air was full of silence, but not peace. It was the silence before questions, before judgment. When they reached the orbiting station, they were led down separate halls. Lena looked at Jake before the guards took her away. "Stay strong," she whispered. He gave a small nod, his fists clenched. Hours passed. Jake sat alone in a bright room while officers asked him questions. What happened in the pod? Why did you not report her presence? Did she attack you? Were you under pressure? Jake answered with calm words and a steady voice. We were cold, we were alone, and we shared what little we had. If I had left her outside, she would have died. If she had closed the door, I would not be here either. They asked again and again. His answers did not change. They looked at him with suspicion, some with anger, some with confusion. Another room across the station. Lena faced her own people. They stood in a circle around her, their faces hard, their voices sharp. You shared your warmth with a human. You slept beside him. You are trained to resist humans, not hold them close. She kept her head high. He saved my life and I saved his. That is not weakness, that is strength. The oldest among them stepped forward. You speak as if he is your friend. Is he? Lena took a breath and said, yes, he is. That answer broke the room. Voices Rose in anger, leaders argued, some demanded punishment, others warned of political damage. The story had already left the room across Alliance space. The drone footage was everywhere. It played on station walls, inside city squares and military halls. Two young soldiers, enemies by history, survivors by chance choosing to share life in the cold. One image said more than any speech in quiet homes. Families watched and felt something shift. Children asked questions. Old warriors felt old hate soften. Some refused to see the meaning. They called it staged, fake, dangerous. But many others saw truth in the middle of this storm. A council was called. A mix of human and alien leaders sat at a long table. In the center stood Jake and Lena. They wore simple clothes, no armor, no weapons, no shields, just themselves. A human boy with tired eyes, an alien girl with quiet strength. One council leader stood. We do not ask for stories, we saw them already. We ask what you believe this means. Jake stepped forward and spoke. We are told that fear keeps us safe. We are trained to think trust is a trap. But I almost died out there, and so did she. And in that moment, what saved us was not orders or armor or old rules. It was one act of trust, one shared sleeping bag, one choice to live. Lena spoke next, her voice steady. If this is wrong, then perhaps the rules are broken. If peace is only allowed when it fits in a box, then peace is not real. We were enemies by name, but we chose to be something else. The room was quiet after that. The questions began. Would you serve together? Again, would you speak together before others? Would you risk your future for each other? They said yes to all. Outside the council room, the news spread again, now with words, now with voices, interviews, speeches, moments of truth. Some leaders stepped down, some soldiers stepped forward. Old laws were challenged, new ones were written, and still in the center of it all was that small image. Two young lives inside one sleeping bag, one choice that sparked something bigger than anyone expected. Jake and Lena were no longer soldiers lost in the snow. Sleeping bag that changed everything. Weeks passed since the rescue. Jake and Lena were no longer unknown soldiers. Their faces were now on every screen, their names spoken in every corner of the galaxy. Some called them heroes, others called them traitors. But no one could ignore them. They had become the spark that lit something much greater inside a quiet room on a peaceful moon. Jake stood by the window watching the stars. He wore a simple jacket, no medals, no armor, just a man who had seen too much and still stood tall. The door opened behind him, and Lena stepped in. She wore the same calm look she always had, but her eyes were different now, filled with strength and fire. You ready? She asked. Jake turned to her, his voice soft as I'll ever be. Together they walked down the hall toward the great chamber. Thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds waited inside. Leaders, soldiers, civilians, reporters, all gathered to witness something that had never happened before. Not a war, not a treaty, but a speech from two young survivors who had shared a sleeping bag in a storm. As they stepped onto the platform, the crowd went silent. No music, no fanfare, just silence. Jake looked at Lena, then stepped forward. He spoke clearly, his voice steady. I did not come here to defend what we did, because I do not believe there is anything to defend. We survived because we trusted each other. We lived because we shared what little we had, and we found something inside that pod that many forget exists. Hope. Lena stepped beside him and spoke next. I was raised to believe humans were dangerous, selfish, reckless. In the cold, in the dark, I saw none of that. I saw kindness, I saw courage, and I saw a boy who chose to save a stranger. That choice changed me, changed both of us. Jake reached into a small bag and pulled out the sleeping bag they had used, worn, torn, still stained from that night. He held it up for all to see. This is not just fabric, it is a symbol, a reminder that peace is not made in halls like this, but in moments of choice, when we choose trust over fear, kindness over hate. Lena added, if two young soldiers could find peace in the snow, then maybe so can all of us. They stepped back, and the room erupted, not with noise, but with slow growing applause. It started small, then spread louder and louder until the walls shook. Some leaders cried, some stood in silence. All of them felt it change. After that day, things did not become perfect, There were still debates, arguments, and resistance. The seed had been planted. Training programs began to mix humans and aliens more often. Schools taught the story of Jake and Lena, and on many Alliance worlds, a statue was built, two young figures standing side by side, wrapped in one sleeping bag. It was not just a story now, it was history. Jake and Lena continued to serve not as soldiers, but as speakers, teachers, and peace builders. Traveled from planet to planet, speaking to crowds large and small, telling the same story again and again, not to become famous, to remind the galaxy of what truly matters. One night under the stars, they sat together on a small hill. The sky above them was full of light ships moving like fireflies across space. Lena looked at Jake and asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't opened that bag?" Jake smiled a little. "I'd be frozen for sure." She laughed, then grew quiet. "But really," Jake looked up at the stars, "then none of this would have happened. No statues, no speeches, no peace. Just silence." She nodded and leaned back on the grass. It's strange how one small moment can change everything. He looked at her and said it wasn't small. It was the biggest thing I've ever known. They sat there in silence, the stars above them, the memories between them. No more need for words, because they both knew the truth. They were no longer just Jake and Lena. They were something more, a reminder that in the darkest, coldest place, a simple act of trust could start a fire that warms a galaxy, and that sometimes peace begins not with armies or laws, but with one sleeping bag and two beating hearts. The end.